Welcome to Transformational Blueprints, the podcast that's here to tackle the big question. Why do so many transformation programs fall short, and what can we do about it? I'm Mario Michaels, founder and director of Synaxia Group, and I'm thrilled to have you join me. In this series, we go beyond theory, bringing you first-hand stories and insights from some of the world's top architecture and transformation leaders. It's all about sharing real-world lessons, sparking fresh ideas, and giving back to the architecture community. So whether you're looking to learn, be inspired, or stay ahead of the curve, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive in together. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking to Nadir Khan about leading without limits, how to build teams that show up even when the money runs out. And there's a great story behind this one. So Nadir is a transformational technology leader with a distinguished career marked by pioneering transformations and robust digital infrastructure advancements. His professional journey at Queen Mary University of London as the principal architect for the smart campus transformation has been the epitome of visionary strategy and adept leadership, where he harmonized cutting-edge technologies like IoT, AI, big data analytics to architect intelligent ecosystems. His forte lies in helming large-scale transformation programs from ideation to realization, excelling in technical evaluations, vendor liaisons, and infrastructure design to elevate operational efficiency and enrich academic engagement. So, Nadir, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, all.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got to where you are.
So I didn't start out thinking I would end up leading enterprise architecture at places like Parliament or the V&A. Actually, my first job was building computers in a local shop.
Okay.
Like screwing motherboards in, installing RAM, fixing printers, and working on network, Wi-Fi, things like that.
Okay.
And I think it was all hands-on work, sometimes messy, but it gave me something really valuable and an understanding of how systems actually work from the inside out.
Yep.
I think that further developed into leading me into data centers. My first place was E18. I was managing operations across 15 global sites.
Yeah.
And over time, my role evolved from just keeping the lights on to asking how can we make things things and systems faster and more aligned with organizational goals. I think that curiosity eventually brought me into enterprise architecture. And now at the V&A, I'm combining all those lessons to help shape a future where technology empowers art and culture and creativity.
Okay. V&A is Victorian Albert Museum. So your role over there, tell us a little bit about what your role is and your remit over there.
So with V&A, V&A didn't have any architecture function when I joined. So you can imagine whatever that brings with like siloed systems, processes, and a lot of complexities where things were deployed very technically. At the V&A, our mission is to inspire creativity and sounding through art and design. So when I think about enterprise architecture, it's not about abstract frameworks. It's about enabling curators to tell stories, conservators to protect priceless works, and visitors to have unforgettable experiences. My role is to lead the strategic evolution of our entire technology landscape, whether it's from cloud platforms, cybersecurity, digital visitor engagement, or emerging tech like AI and AR. But it's not just about modernization. It's more about alignment. Every system, every tool, every upgrade must serve the museum's core purpose. So apart from this side of the EA, I think there's another bigger element of the technology governance, making sure that everybody is aligned and we are all heading in the right direction. Whatever investments we are making now are impactful even now and for the next 5 years as well. So I'm providing that strategic oversight and the direction for the rest of the technology department to move in.
And I suppose it's probably one of the biggest cases around thinking about the customer engagement first and working backwards, because, if and please do correct me if I'm wrong, if I think about my experience going to museums as a, nearly 40-year-old person to what my children are, when we take my children now, it's completely different. So, and it is more technology driven. But then you have another issue around getting them so engaged that they want to come again, because you can't just have one customer life cycle of one visit. Otherwise, there will be no V&A museum soon, because once you visited it once, you've done it. It has to constantly be that change. So what part does technology play in that?
So I'll give you examples. So on my day of my interview, so I walked in to V&A, and as I was looking around, I was fascinated by all of these objects there. And funny enough, I've been living in London for such a long time. I've never stepped into V&A. I've never thought of it.
Yeah.
And I walked in and I turned around, and there's a massive clock. It's huge. And it's installed up there, and you could see the gears moving. It's bronze color. It's beautiful. And I started looking. I was mesmerized by how everything was working. And then I started looking around, trying to find out, well, where did it come from? Why is it here? Who put it there? Why is it so significant? All those questions. And all I could find was a small placard. It was saying what it was. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do my research and find out what this is.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I never had the time again to actually go and research, because the way life is nowadays and everything.
Yeah.
So what that made me realize is that bringing that data information closer to people when they are there, to give them that experience that they're here, they know everything about the object they're looking at. They have that sense of feeling of satisfaction out of that visit. So you might end up spending hours on one object, looking at it, and then the history, and there's a story behind this. So finding out all of that. So I'm thinking, okay, so whatever's happening to libraries, schools, and colleges, and these universities is going to happen to museums as well, because if we are not moving with time, we are not making that data available to people, to customers, we will be irrelevant very soon.
Yeah.
So they will have to move at pace. Like things like I'm talking about bringing AI, augmented reality. Like there's one use case identified, and I'm speaking to senior leadership about this, is we have a Japanese section and said, why don't we speak to Meta and try to get them on board with partnering with us, and we give these customers a very exclusive tour of Japanese times, like back in 1940s or 1800s, what the villages used to look like and what they used to do with this object or that object. So to create that story, or like you will see a lot of kids sitting there or trying to sketch some object and do something for them, like for instance, put some kind of a camera there that can help people draw these things on a piece of paper, just to engage them. And this is like an activity for them, something to make them come back again and engage with us. And this engagement, apart from fun and play, there's a lot of element of education behind there that they will learn, but not directly, indirectly. So that's the vision I have. That's what I'm looking at. And this is exactly what I said in my interview. I said, this is what is driving me towards this place. If we are not on the same page, then I don't think we should continue. And they are on the same page. This is what they want as well. So this is how I ended up in V&A.
Good. Okay. So we've got a question from the previous guest. How can enterprise architecture continue to show value to C-suite or CXO in the current climate of rapid consumer or product-driven instant reward or failure? Very, perfectly linked to literally what you've just said there.
I think from the C-suite perspective, I think that they absolutely want speed. They want things delivered very quickly before they become irrelevant, but they also want direction. So the whole purpose and function of EA to provides that compass to move fast and stay aligned. When I was relocating data centers at Parliament during lockdown, we couldn't afford rushed in blindly. So we had MPs needing remote access, systems failing under strain, and zero room for error, because obviously that would have a very negative impact of how Parliament operates. So without architecture, we would have created more problems than we solved, and more complicated things than they were. So enterprise architecture isn't about slowing things down. It's about ensuring that short-term wins contribute to long-term resilience. It's like I said to you in our previous conversation, is it keeping your ear to the ground and your sight on the horizon. So it's mostly looking like that.
Yeah,
and just making sure
getting that cake.
whatever you're doing enables now, but in the end, it needs to move in that direction.
Yeah.
So it's about reducing risk in agile delivery, avoiding duplications, translating strategy into actions, and having an overall plan and control over these things to make sure that whatever is happening is moving towards that target end state. In a
Okay.
world of instant results, I think EA is the GPS that says, yes, go fast, but keep going in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really valid point. Nadir, what do you think makes a great architect in today's world?
Oh wow, I wouldn't know because I'm not one yet. So, so I would say,
Very humble, very
um,
humble.
so a great architect is someone. So it's not just the technical side. So I don't think a great architect is someone who doesn't just understand systems. They understand why those systems exist. It's not enough to know the latest tools or frameworks. You need to be
Hmm.
curious about business, empathetic to stakeholders, and able to translate complex ideas into clear decisions. The best architects are, in my opinion, facilitators,
Yeah.
influencers, storytellers. They don't dictate solutions. They
Yeah.
create space for the right conversations to happen. And
Hmm.
above all, they ask, who does this serve and why does it matter? I think when I'm able to answer these questions much better, then I think I will be one of them.
So we're going to go into your role at the Parliament because you were at Parliament when COVID hit. So what was, and you mentioned how important architecture was in that with MPs remote working and so on, and that's just the sort of high level stuff. What was your initial reaction when COVID hit, and how did this impact the architectural priorities within Parliament?
I think it dropped us in a massive chaos state because immediately our priorities shifted. Like our priorities before was resilience and security and sustainability and all these kind of things, and then suddenly we were focusing on enabling fast to make
Hmm.
sure the government function is happening. So,
Yep.
so things like hybrid working, it became a permanent fixture. We invested heavily in collaboration tools, cloud platforms, identity and access management for remote accesses. We also built a stronger foundation for observability and automation, I think,
Hmm.
which still continues to improve service reliability and reduce incident response time. Many of the architectural decisions we made under pressure, I think, have now become part of the long-term blueprint.
So when you were doing it then, did you have that in mind? Because everything was moving so quickly. So, there must have been a shift, especially in government as well, where it does take longer to deliver on anything because it is like turning the Titanic, isn't it? Because there's so many moving
Yes.
parts to it. Not like it's any other business, by the way, but you know what I mean. So how did when you were entering these decisions, it must have been around tactical response here and now, let's get this sorted. So how, was it luck that it ended up better for long term as well, or did you have that in mind? How did you, come to it?
I think notably there were two people. So our CTO at that time,
Hmm.
Simon Bodley, and our director, David Smith. I think these two people, these individual people, what they did was enable us.
Yeah.
They supported us. So they would sit down
Hmm.
and listen to us,
Yeah.
what we were saying. So what we would have is a problem statement. But normally
Yeah.
what you get is not actually a problem statement, it's a symptom or an
Yeah.
issue that you then turn into a problem statement. And
Sure.
they would say, this is the problem. This is what business is struggling with. This is
Yeah.
what's happening. And then we
Yeah.
would start coming up with different ideas.
Yeah.
And especially with Simon Boddy and he's my mentor as well.
Yeah.
Uh, the ability of this person to think out of the box was phenomenal, and his approachability was great. Like I would just walk into his office and then start talking to him, and
Hmm.
there was no constraint. So I think from his perspective, because he was owning the strategy at that time,
Yeah.
so from his perspective, he knew what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And how it all meets up. Like I started working on zero trust architecture with him while all of this was happening in the background. Like the data centers were being built and moved, and
Hmm.
distribution blocks were being laid, and the work on the Big Ben was happening as well. So
Yeah.
because he knew in the end that with the zero trust architecture, we will end up in a situation where we will need to give people access remotely and to
Yeah.
protect Parliament from these kind of cyber attacks or hacker attacks, or even to the peers that are sitting at home. We have to have more robust security. So, so, so I think from the vision perspective, it was his vision, and it was me working with him enabling that. So I think a very good teamwork
Hmm.
and collaboration with people who were very visionary just made it happen.
And how did architecture come into that then? So you mentioned there around, this vision of zero trust architecture and so on was imperative. Of course it was. We're dealing with, government property at the end of the day, aren't we? And not just property, I mean sort of data, systems, etc., etc. So how did enterprise and or solution architecture help with those sort of decision making within during lockdown periods?
So basically, what we had from the senior leadership was a target end state.
Yeah.
They said to us, "This is what we need to achieve." So from the architecture perspective, our first point was to understand our as is. The technology was heavily undocumented. There
Hmm.
was a lot of unknowns. Like nobody knew anything, or people who had some knowledge, most of them were not allowed on site because being at high risk because of either age or health issues. So there was a lot of unknowns. So the architecture established the as is. And then we sat down and created a roadmap of how we need to achieve that. So without that, just moving blindly towards a target end state would have
Hmm.
given us a lot of complexities. We would
Yeah.
have built things that we were not able to sustain them in future.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And what were some of the biggest architectural constraints or technical constraints actually that you had to work with in such, a unique and historically rooted institution? It's probably the best way to put it, isn't it?
Yes. So I think one of the biggest restraints there was like ideally the parliament was built for candles.
Yeah.
It wasn't built for fiber optic or high compute systems or things like that.
Hmm.
And it's riddled with asbestos, and every time you need to touch something you have to get 10 different kind of permits and the red tapes and the scrutiny behind it, all of that bureaucracy. Obviously, from a technical mind, it's a very simple straightforward answer to,
Yeah.
yeah, you connect point A to point B.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in actual putting it in a building is a completely different ballgame. Like
Yeah.
you have to think about not just the technical restraints, the cultural restraints. Like we were talking about, so I was designing a data center in one of the basements because that was the only space we could get. But then those basements would usually get flooded all the time. So they have these civil engineers in, and they were sitting there talking to me, and they were saying, "Oh, we're going to design the sump. We will do this. We'll do that." And then somebody said, "Oh, we will just put some water there, and it will just push the water out." And I said to them, I said, "Well, the thing is that there are 6 or 7 engineers on site, and you got more than 10 buildings. So when
Yeah.
we get flooded, it's not selective. The flood goes everywhere." And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said, "Would you think that they would prefer this over a speaker's house or so some also or House of Parliament?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need to take the culture in space and think about some way to make sure that the sump is regularly tested, it does self-tests. So I ended up designing an intelligent data center in Parliament, which was not completely lights out, but it was managing itself. It had systems that would alert people. It was IP66 rated, like even if the water comes up to knee level, the
Hmm.
systems won't go down. We
Yeah.
designed the cabling from the top, hanging in rather than going up from the
Oh, yeah.
bottom. So we had to adapt a lot and think
Hmm.
innovatively constantly to make sure that we are taking a lot of these cultural aspects, this is the political aspects, the technology restraints, and basically exploring what can go wrong and then just trying to mitigate that.
And this is all at a time where speed was probably, well, speed and reliability and security actually were probably the three main
Yes.
things. And historically, those three things don't go together. You got to pick two, but you didn't have a choice. You had to do three. So that accelerated digital transformation, not just within government, by the way, that was across many sectors. What innovations and architectural decisions that were made during that time have stuck around or influenced the future strategy?
I think to answer your first part of the question, I think what really helped there was to get an agreement from the business on certain things that
Yep.
provide us some kind of a guardrail, saying to us that, okay, you cannot go further than this, or we
Yep.
cannot accept more than this risk. So once we knew what our guardrails was, then it was, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was more directional that we understood, okay, what needs to be done in terms of when we are
Hmm.
designing things. And the second part of your question, what innovative ideas? So
Hmm.
like for instance, there was a redesign project
Yep.
going on where we were upgrading our buildings across Parliament.
Hmm.
There were plenty of Westminster buildings. So I was asked to look at the building infrastructure of how everything is connected and see what needs to be done in our current plans. When I looked at them, I certainly realized two things. One, the plans at that time were not something that would give us a more than 1 gig speed
Yep.
within the building and communicating back to the main data centers. The other thing was that they didn't have any IoT or AI enabled
Hmm.
works that can be done there. There were no sensors there. There was no physical layer there. It
Yep.
was very box standard. Here's your rack and here's your server and that's it done. Or these are
Hmm.
switches. Very box standard. So I redesigned all of that, and then that design was replicated across all the buildings. But what it gave us now is a very resilient infrastructure where we can literally pick up a DST and go to one of the buildings and distribute the DST across
Yep.
3 floors in different
Yep.
SDPs, like secondary distribution points, and start operating. So if there's an issue or a cyber attack or there's a problem with the building, we can make sure that our resilience is still there. So that fortification of infrastructure, I think that is something that was quite unique in that time,
Hmm.
because these designs were done like 3 years, 4 years before I joined.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then challenging that, and then the senior leadership being open to, make those changes and accepting
Yeah.
that. I think those are the things that stuck, and I'm quite proud of that, because that's something that was my legacy there. Like the Elizabeth Tower, the
Hmm.
design of Elizabeth Tower inside the
Yeah.
infrastructure room, that's all me.
Wow.
So
It's
things like that would always take, like the Palace of Westminster, the computer rooms upstairs and
yeah.
everything. That's something that's going to stick there.
That's incredible, isn't it? Because everybody always says enterprise architecture is often within technology, and I appreciate data centers is within technology. But as you say, you were reviewing building architecture and
Yes.
understanding the design and how it all links together. And I suppose there's this whole thing around architecture and how, they are the people that put up the guardrails and they limit innovation. And, I'm not saying this is true, by the way. I'm saying this is the stigma that architects,
Yeah.
especially enterprise architects, have to deal with on a daily basis. So you're sat in Parliament, a place of tradition. You've got COVID hanging over you, or you were going through lockdown and so on and so forth. How do you balance that urgency with governance, compliance, cultural sensitivity as well? Let's be honest, you probably had the media waiting for you to mess up so they can, so the Daily Mail can write something about how Parliament got it wrong when it wasn't actually. Do you see what I mean? So how do you balance all that whilst keeping people engaged at the same time?
I think what really helped was the chaos that was in play because of the COVID, because everybody was panicking.
Hmm.
So I think what really helped at that time was for us to move faster was that sense of unknown that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You remember that time people used to be really scared of what was going to
Mm.
happen. Like people were like, you can't breathe anymore. You never know
Yeah.
what you're doing with yourself. And and
Yeah.
and and that mindset, and that's what was happening at that time. It pushed people that were very risk averse to start taking risks.
Yeah.
I think that in effect unblocked quite a few things.
Yeah.
I think that helped us move very fast, because
Yeah.
then we didn't have people sitting on it on committees and thinking about it and talking about it, and sometimes they're the people who don't even understand technology and making
Yeah.
technical decisions, and you start thinking, well, no, it doesn't work like this.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and you know going backward and forward and explaining the whole technology to them, and then hoping that they would understand and they would take action.
Hmm.
Instead, because of the urgency, it was like, okay, so we hired the person for a job,
Yeah.
this is what their credentials are, they're there for this, go and do it.
Okay.
I think that helped.
Yeah, and having the right people in the right place. They always say it's people, process, then technology.
Yes.
Often people do it the other way around. Now, you mentioned leading a team through complex, as you mentioned, undocumented data center move. I suppose the first thing you got to do is build trust and then motivate people to work in such a high pressure environment. How did you go about doing that? What was your approach?
So I think the issue we had at that time was that, like I mentioned earlier, that our DC team, Parliament DC team, were mostly not allowed on site because of being high risk, because of health and age and all that. So the biggest challenge I had was that I didn't have any resource. I had plans, I knew what needs to be done, but I didn't have any people to do it with me. And I think what really happened there was that I had an opportunity that was given to me that I can go and start looking at people internally within Parliament and see who I can build my team with.
Yep.
So I went around, I spoke to people, I interviewed them, and tried to understand what their motivation is. I was not looking at transferable skills. I was not looking at knowledge. I was mostly looking at the right attitude, the hunger, where people wanted to do something about their lives. They wanted to, increase their knowledge and experience, and they can have better prospects in life. So I identified quite a few of them, and I just took them on board. And to be honest, I think what really worked was being transparent, being honest, being straightforward, and rather than tell them what needs to be done, show them what needs to be done. I think these are the kind of things that helped a lot. Like, people don't work for money alone. They work for meaning, for legacy, for pride. One of the things I learned very early on in life was that if you want something from someone, don't tell them what you want. You tell them what they're going to get out of it.
Okay.
And what really helped there was that when I spoke to these team members, and I told them honestly, I said, look, this is difficult. You will have a very steep learning curve. You will have to put hours in. There are issues around, like, people having very low trust, and like I had people, 70% of the people there were thinking we're going to fail miserably. We will not be able to move. And then there were people there, ironically, and kind of bizarre, that they were putting bets on that we're going to fail. So that helped. That actually helped, because that gave that morale boost to the team, saying, no, we can do it. We can actually do it, and giving them that purpose that, look, this is not just a data center move. We are going through a national emergency at the moment, and this parliament is the foundation of how to sustain all of this. So what we are doing is we're enabling this country, we're enabling this government to do their job. So I think that drove them, that gave them the sense of purpose, that legacy, that pride that they have actually achieved something. So, like, I had instances where our network service provider at that time, the engineers used to work with me all day, and when we would finish at 5 o'clock, they would go offline and then come back online at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and work with me till 12. And they wouldn't tell their team, their own companies, that they've been working 4 hours, 5 hours extra. Just to make sure that, because we used to go through each and every line, like I would go and physically document everything, and they will go from the switch and see if it is correct, and then labeling everything and making sure the connections are there. So when we move things, they actually work after moving them. And then we had a contracting company, Brightline, at that time, brilliant people. They were helping us do all the infrastructure cabling for this thing, and we ran out of money. We didn't have. I think we went over budget because this project was running before I joined, but because of either the house is sitting or something is happening politically, or it was getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and we didn't have any money in the end. And I know just a week before the actual project, the go live date, I was told that, okay, we can't pay them, and we don't have money, and we won't have any more. So I went and told them, I said, look, this is the situation. I'm very grateful for what you guys have done till now, and I really appreciate that. But this is a situation we will not be able to pay. And so that was it. So now I prepped up the team that, okay, we don't have that support anymore. We need to, increase, make sure we shifted, changed our plans. The whole thing, like, I used to go through the whole plan every day in my head, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because I'm working with teams that are not trained to
Yeah.
be data centers, or no, they are trained, but they're not experts, or they are not skilled enough to be moving data centers. So
Yeah.
I had to break down everything into small steps for them to, step one, you do this, step two, you do this, step three, and each and everyone has their own script to go with. So it was like a symphony, and then I had to change everything. And then on the day of the move, suddenly I see these six guys walked in from this contracting company, and I said, "Oh, guys, I hope your boss told you we can't pay you." I
Yeah.
said, "We're not here for the money." So we want to learn. We are just here to support this. We want to make sure we have been working on this, and we want to make sure it's live. We want to see this go live. And
Wow.
they just rolled up sleeve and they were in there for that change went on for what, 16 hours. And these people
Jeez.
were constantly in and out doing all of this work, the network engineers, the cybersecurity engineers, all of these people. And I think it was just that sense of pride and legacy and belongingness and achievement and ownership. And I think one of the biggest thing that I see and I've noticed in my 15 years career is recognition. You always recognize your team members, like whoever does what, make sure that everyone knows who has done it. And the credit should go to where the credit is due.
That is amazing. I don't think I've ever heard, I'm not saying this has never happened, by the way, but I've certainly never heard where a team of contractors have turned up knowing they're not going to get paid to get it delivered. You must have built, and you've sort of touched on, bits of it, but you must have built that purpose-driven leadership, and that I not necessarily identified intrinsic motivation because they weren't your contractors, but you must have tapped into something emotionally, and whether you did it, and I want to know if you did this purposefully or not, for them to think this is something I want to be part of, whether I get paid or not. So the first question is, did you know what motivated those contractors for you to then deliver that to them? Or was it a case of they just wanted to do it because of how important it was?
So I think what I realized, looking at patterns and looking at human behavior, what I really realized with them was that they always used to work like a pact.
Yep.
They had a very tribal mentality, very, very pack mentality. So one of the key things I did with contractors was that the BAU teams, I I removed that silo, or that barrier where you say you're a contractor and I'm permanent.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, I did that. I
Yeah.
removed that from day one. I said, it doesn't matter what your designation is.
Yeah.
What you bring to the table makes you valuable and gives
Okay.
you the right to speak. So that was one thing. So there was that no hierarchy, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What you bring to the table makes you more
Yep.
important.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing was to make sure that they feel the ownership. They feel
Yeah.
that they own this. They are part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what really, to be honest, I didn't plan for them to do this. Like they would come. I
No.
was not expecting this. This was
Mm-hmm.
like a surprise, a great
Yeah.
surprise.
Yeah.
But throughout the whole journey, my immediate was to create that pack, that team, that sense
Mm-hmm.
of understanding, not just from figure of speech, but from the cultural aspect as well. And culture is you said cultures when it's not spoken about. You do it by actions. You
Yep.
you lead by example. And I think that helps.
Yeah. And everybody always talks about purpose-led or purpose-driven leadership, and you've tapped into a couple of things there around how to build that. So you've gone and found people internally who from different departments to help you with this data center migration. You're up against it time-wise. We all know about the risk, the reputation, etc., etc. What specific strategies did you use to upskill the team to prepare them for, such a, let's call it technically demanding migration? Like there is no room for failure. You've briefly touched on every single day. Here's what you're doing, and almost like a script of their day plan. But there's got to be a little bit more to that, Nadir.
Oh
Surely.
yes, definitely yes.
Yeah.
So uh, I think what really helped at that time was that I took interest in their strengths. I made my business to understand what are they struggling with, what are they
Yeah.
not, what's not easy for them, and trying to pair up team members in a mentor and
Mhm.
mentee situation where
Yeah.
they would complement each other. So that was one
Yeah.
thing. Second was that I used to spend at least an hour, 2 hour every day. At the end of the day, I would sit with them and I'll say, okay, so what happened today? And I'll go with things.
Mhm.
And then I'll start explaining. So, look, if you do it like
Yeah.
this will be the effect. This is what you're looking for. We don't want this. This
Mhm.
can go wrong. And I will
Yeah.
tell them that. And I gave them that sense that it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
Although it was a very big risk on me. But for
Mhm.
them, I gave them, like, for me, it was, we can't fail. It has to
Mhm.
happen. We need to ensure there's resilience. We need to make sure that
Yep.
business continuity stays up.
Yep.
But for them, I didn't let that pressure on them. I said, look, you can fail. Not a
Yep.
problem.
Yeah.
Because I've written the script. I know
Mhm.
how much fail is
Yeah.
and what can be reversed and what cannot be reversed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I gave them that within that playground. I let them play.
Mhm.
And they made mistakes
Yeah.
and they learned. And this is how I learned. Like I'm not educated in computer science.
Mhm.
I'm actually a law graduate,
Right.
and
Okay.
this was my hobby, and I
Mhm.
enjoyed doing these things, and this is how I got into it. And
Mhm.
I think what I learned was from mistakes. Like
Yeah.
when my data center times, I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned from
Mhm.
them. But now they're sitting there, and every time I look at things, I remember.
Mhm.
So giving them option, and this is exactly what I've said to our C-suite here at VNA. I said, for collective learning and you want the teams to be upskilled, we need to have permission to fail.
Yeah.
You have to accept that. Without that, there's no innovation, there's no learning, there's nothing.
Yeah.
You're going to be stuck where you are right now.
Yeah. Of course. With this is how we've always done it. So there's a couple of key practical takeaways there. What other lessons have you learned about loyalty, leadership, and culture that you carry with you today, Nadir?
I think being honest, being
Mhm.
transparent, respectful. I think one of the big things was that when somebody comes up to you and suddenly starts sharing their personal life with you, you
Yep.
pay attention. You
Yep.
listen to them. You might not be in the right position to give advice, but you're not there to advise them. You're there to listen
Yeah.
and show empathy. Show care. That when you see them again, ask them what happened with that. People
Yeah.
remember that because
Yeah. Yeah.
when people realize that you're not a number, you're a human being, and you're treated like a human, they will immediately have bond with you.
Yeah.
So it's respect. So this is how you get respect.
Yeah.
Like my team was more worried about upsetting me or letting me not upset, letting me down
Yeah.
than the job itself.
Good place to be.
And it's not because I was any harsh or anything with them. It's just they knew how much I was putting in,
That was their
and
purpose. You know, they
and,
felt
and
that. Yeah.
exactly, and it worked.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay. We're going to move on to our quick fire questions now. So, recently been appointed into a sort of architecture leadership role. What advice would you give to somebody in a similar position, recently being appointed to chief architect, head of architecture, whatever it may be?
I think I wish someone had told me early on in my career that leadership isn't about having all the answers.
Hmm.
It's about the right questions and
Yeah.
listening deeply. I think early on I spent too much time trying to prove how technically smart I was
Yeah.
because I had this thing because I didn't have the formal computer science education. So I was always competing with people who have
Yep.
degrees and
Mhm.
certifications and all that. And although I would have practical knowledge and experience and doing those things, I always went above and beyond,
Mhm.
pushing and proving myself.
Yeah.
Whereas, to be honest, now thinking about it, didn't need to.
Yeah.
I should have more focused on listening
Yeah.
and trying to understand the narrative. If you can connect the dots between strategy, technology, and people, you
Yeah.
will have far more impact than any code or you write or you build any system.
Hmm. That was my next question around early advice. So we won't go into that because you've just squash that one. So what do you think CIOs or CTOs genuinely care about?
I think I would say the CIOs and CTOs would generally care about outcomes.
Okay.
I think they're more focused on outcomes, whether it's resilience, whether it's sustainability, or it's finance or whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's the outcomes, the value
Yep.
stream, because at the end of the day, because that's what they are answerable to.
Yeah.
And as long as you are supporting them in that, and
Yep.
making sure that they have the right answers for them to give forward, you will be in a very good position to support them.
Okay, fine. And if you could ask a CTO or CIO one question and get a genuinely honest answer, no politics, no nothing, just what would that be?
I would want to know, like, looking at what's happening right now in technology world, and I see these different organizations struggling with things, and I don't understand the hesitation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want to know that what is the hesitation that is stopping them to progress further with regards to their data, and they all know where we are heading. So why there's a hesitation there?
Yep. Okay, fair enough. And purely from an architecture talent perspective, what do you anticipate the biggest change over the next 5 years will be?
I think the biggest change I'm noticing right now is that focus on a SME mindset is going away. It's more a T-shaped
Mm.
personalities, like people who have the technical knowledge and understanding, but they can communicate and have that influencing factor to them, that storytelling factor to them as well. And they are pragmatic, and they are business minded as well, not
Yeah.
just technology minded. So I think from that perspective, communication would be one of
Yeah.
the big things. The soft skills, I think data, one of the
Mhm.
biggest ones, because this is where we are heading to. I was in a conversation recently with this top leadership, and I asked them, I said, what do we do here? So what is our purpose in VNA?
Mhm.
And they said, oh, you have a technology support. And I said, that's not what we are here
Yeah.
for. We are here to provide you that information and data when you need it.
Mhm.
This is what sole purpose is. We are
Yeah.
enabling that. So data is one of those things that we will see a massive spike in. So an architect who has a good understanding of cybersecurity, has
Mhm.
good understanding of data, can communicate well, and can is really good at storytelling, and understand. And to be honest, this is something I only found out now about myself, that sometimes what you perceive as common sense is not really common.
Yeah.
And you need to understand from other people's perspective what
Yeah.
common sense is. So this is something I'm learning now, like
Yeah.
after 15 years being there, and now I realize actually the fault is with me.
Yeah.
I'm not understanding people properly, so
Yeah.
I need to adjust that, because what I perceive as common sense is not
Yeah.
seen as common. So yes, that's what I think. That's going to be next 5 years.
Okay. Thank you for that. At the beginning of the episode, you got asked a question from the previous guest. So it's now your turn to ask a question to the next guest. What's your question, Nadir?
So my question would be, how do you maintain momentum and alignment with leading transformation in organizations with deeply entrenched legacy cultures and processes?
Brilliant. I'll let you know how we get on with
That
that
that's
answer.
that's what I'm dealing with right now.
You want someone to mark your homework,
Yes.
fair enough.
Well, why not? Yes, somebody can. That would be great.
Well, sadly, Nadir, we've run out of time. Thanks so much for a great conversation. It's been really interesting and great to chat with you in detail around how to build teams that show up even when the money runs out. So thanks for an excellent podcast episode and for giving us your time today.
No, thank you. Thank you for arranging all this. It was really good talking to you. Thank you. It was a good experience.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Transformational Blueprints. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found plenty of insights and takeaways to fuel your journey. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could share it, leave a review, or give us a like. It helps us reach more people in the industry who can benefit from these conversations. Don't forget to follow Synaxia Group on LinkedIn to stay updated on new episodes. The links are in the show notes. Join us next time for more tips, strategies, and stories from some of the brightest minds in technology and transformation. Until then, take care and keep transforming.